Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to the All Me podcast. My name is Tavis Piatoli, sports dietitian for the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and today I'm going to be your host. Did you know there's about 100 trillion bacteria in the gut, and it's a combination of good and bad that live in our digestive system? This is also known as the gut microbiota, and also gut microbiome, and determining how healthy your gut is can dictate the outcome of how you feel on a daily basis. In this podcast, we speak with dietitian Abby Grimm, who specializes in functional medicine and works with individuals to restore gut function and optimize health. We discuss what the microbiome is, what types of foods influence it in a positive and negative way, how probiotics fit into the equation, and how things you may be doing can harm gut function. Abby is a functional trained performance dietitian based in Cleveland, Ohio. She received her Bachelor of Science from the University of Dayton and completed her Master of Science in Nutrition from Case Western Reserve University. She works in private practice for FWDfuel Sports Nutrition Company, a company focused on bridging the gap between conventional sports nutrition and integrative functional nutrition. She guides individuals on using lifestyle and food as medicine to optimize their health and performance. She specializes in helping individuals overcome hormone imbalances, poor gut health, and performance plateaus. Abby is on a mission to help individuals understand their physiology, in particular, the critical role nutrition plays in optimizing overall health and human performance. Abby, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the All Me podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So we have an incredibly interesting topic today. I've always wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about really just the gut and obviously the word microbiome. I know we're going to dive into that. And I know there's a lot of questions in the world about probiotics. We're going to dive into that. But today we're really going to talk about just, what is a lot of the things that we do when it comes to eating and food and how does it affect our gut and digestion. But before we really get into that piece, we always like to learn a little bit about our guest and kind of their career path. I think it's always fun to learn a little bit about that. So just tell us a little bit about your career path. And number one, what interested you in becoming a dietitian?
Yeah, love this question. I think like many of us kind of in the sports nutrition space, I was a lifelong athlete, played competitive volleyball and swam in high school. And honestly, from a young age, literally in high school, I was like, I love nutrition. I want to be a dietitian. It was always something I was very, very passionate about, and it made my decision easy to kind of study it in college. And then, I knew in some aspect I wanted to be involved in sports nutrition just because, I've always been so passionate and, curious about the role that it played in like fueling my performance and all of that. But kind of during my college years is when I kind of started to experience kind of some unfortunate health issues, honestly. Is it related to my hormones and my menstrual cycle? And I even started to deal with a lot of gut issues, a lot of just really frustrating and uncomfortable gut symptoms. And I was seeking a lot of help from conventional doctors, both in the hormone space as well as the GI specialist space, and really not getting any answers, not really getting much relief. And then kind of at the same time when this was all going on, I got very competitive in CrossFit and actually started to compete in CrossFit. And so in the CrossFit space, not sure how familiar people are, but there's a huge focus kind of on fueling for performance, utilizing whole foods, really optimizing nutrition, not always in the best way from some people, but there really is more of an emphasis in there. And there's a lot of also attention in functional medicine and more holistic medicine and nutrition in general. And so I kind of developed just this passion and interest in more of a functional nutrition approach, but also loved everything about just conventional sports nutrition as well. And honestly, I knew this is kind of the track I wanted to take, not sure in what capacity, but really had the opportunity coming out of, my master's degree and my internship to work in private practice alongside another dietitian. I know you're friends with Kylene and have just had an awesome experience working in private practice with her, really kind of blurring these two worlds of functional and sports nutrition. And it's just been awesome. I've enjoyed every minute of it so far.
No, that's awesome. We've been very fortunate. We had Kylene on a podcast a few months back, and her podcast is doing really well. But this is really unique to know a little bit more about your path. But also, the fact that as sports dietitians, or at least as dietitians, we've chosen to go certain routes, right? There's certain things that interest us more than others. I'm not going to go into what interests me. It's really about you. So you have an interest in the GI system and the gut. So what made you really want to kind of like, oh, I want to learn more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I kind of alluded to a little bit, I personally started to experience some really unfortunate and uncomfortable digestive symptoms. And so that kind of really sparked my interest in learning more about the gut microbiome. And so I kind of started to read a lot more and research a lot more, all while I was obviously learning a lot of the, traditional nutrition information. And then it was, as I got into kind of helping myself and learning about how I could help myself and taking some of these more functional approaches, I started to notice a ton of relief in my gut symptoms. And as it, improved my performance, just my overall daily functioning and health. And then you bring that into clinical practice and in the world, not only just of functional nutrition, but I think it's so impossible nowadays to ignore the information and the research that is coming out about the gut microbiome, whether you practice nutrition or not, or whether you practice in more of a functional nutrition space or not. I mean, you just can't ignore it anymore. And we're learning about how much of a foundational role it plays. And so taking that and knowing that in practice, the way that we look at things a lot of times is you can't not use the gut microbiome as almost the pinnacle of your practice, like the foundation of your practice. And so really it's just knowing that, okay, this has such a huge role and trying to learn as much about it, because when I started to, again, practice learning more about the gut and how to kind of optimize it, you start to get, incredible improvements and results within the athletes and the clients that you're working with. And so it's just continued my interest of kind of learning as much as I can. Again, I'm not going to say I'm an expert microbiologist or that I know every single research study out there, but because there's just so much to learn and know, but, I will continue to kind of just grow in my knowledge as much as I can.
Yeah, and that's a great explanation. And it's good to see that you chose a path. Obviously, a lot of us choose paths based on personal experience, personal love, personal enjoyment. But the world does expect us to know everything sometimes. I find that it's like we can't know everything. Now, you've mentioned gut microbiome a couple of times, and our listeners are probably like, what is this gut microbiome? So let's define that. What is the gut microbiome? Is there a simple explanation or definition of what that is?
Yeah, first of all, I think you make a great point. It's kind of a buzzword nowadays. We're all hearing the word gut microbiome and gut health, and a lot of these things kind of are used interchangeably, but what I would say as far as a definition for the microbiome is that a microbiome is really just all the organisms in an environment that that's the word that's used to describe all the microorganisms in the environment. And in this case, we're talking about in the digestive tract. So within this gut microbiome is where we find gut microbiota. And so that's kind of the word that's often used interchangeably when we're talking about gut health or the gut microbiome. But that microbiota is actually those microorganisms that are making up the gut microbiome. So microbiota being like the bacteria and the funguses and the fungi and the parasites and all the things that we know are residing within that gut microbiome.
So that's kind of, you already answered my next question, because I was going to I see the word gut microbiota a lot. So it's really the microbiota, that big whole system of the microbiome. Is that correct?
Right. It's all those little different, literally the microorganisms that are found within the gut microbiome.
Now, let's talk about functions of this a little bit. Are there primary factors that influence the framework or the building blocks of the gut microbiome?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we can kind of think of this twofold, we can think about early on in life. I mean, there's research now saying that within the first 3 to 4 weeks of life is when, the building blocks of a baby's gut microbiome is built. And a lot of that can actually have to do with, whether they're being fed breast milk, whether they were born, naturally through the vaginal canal, or whether they were born via C-section. I mean, the exposure that is given to the baby at that time is really pivotal in kind of establishing what their microbiome can look like. But as we know, I mean, there's just so many different factors now that are going to influence that throughout our life. And I would say arguably dietary intake is going to be number one, not only just our macronutrient intake, but obviously our micronutrient intake as well. And then all the other aspects of food that are getting into our food, right? So different additives and artificial sweeteners. I think we might dive into that a little bit more, but just everything from a dietary perspective. But kind of outside, I guess, of diet, we can think about stress being a huge factor that can influence that. It's one of the more underappreciated things, I think, oftentimes that we think about. Even there's some research now saying like water quality can have a huge impact on the microbiome, different, environmental exposures. So again, could go down a whole rabbit hole with this, but really I would say not only it's just like what happens early on in life as far as what the baby's exposed to, as well as diet, but also just our lifestyles, our environment, and our stress can probably be the additional, really important factors.
Yeah, that's interesting to know. Is like at birth, it's like wow, within the first 3 to 4 weeks, that gut starting to form and develop certain patterns. And I found it interesting. Like wow, you said natural childbirth, C-section. Maybe they were on an epidural, and I know nothing about that stuff. So I was like, that's extremely interesting because I was like, all right, my daughter was breastfed, not by me, obviously, but she was breastfed. She was breastfed for I think a little over 2 years, and she was born naturally. So I was like, okay, that's really cool. Hopefully she has a healthy gut long term. Now, you mentioned foods, diet can impact that. And that's really leads directly to my next question is, are there specific foods that we eat that can have a positive impact on our gut health?
Yeah, no, great question. Obviously, there has to be, right? If diet plays such a huge role, there's got to be things that either fuel it or don't. And what we know about the gut microbiota is that they actually feed off of these indigestible carbs that we eat, or in our world, we talk about them as fiber. So obviously we as humans, there's different carbohydrates that we cannot digest. We cannot break them down. And this is literally the role of the gut microbiota is they kind of break these down and create energy from them. And one of the biggest roles that they have with this is that they produce what we call short chain fatty acids. And, whether you're a dietitian listening to this or whether you're a nutrition student, we all learned about the different short chain fatty acids and, butyrate and acetate and propionate and some of the roles that these things play. We don't necessarily need to go into the nitty gritty on that, but we're finding that a lot of the role of the gut microbiota is not just what they can do, but what these short chain fatty acids are doing that they're actually producing from feeding on these carbs. The short chain fatty acids have been shown to actually produce and activate vitamins. So like vitamin K, different B vitamins. It's very interesting. Sometimes I will find an individual with a very low B vitamin profile, like deficiencies in B vitamins. And then we take a look at some of the balance of their gut bacteria, and they've got very low levels of the commensal or beneficial bacteria. So kind of very interesting. The more I've learned about that, the connection that we've been able to see there. But just overall, they're going to kind of help with activating and producing vitamins. They modulate inflammation. And they actually have a role in energy metabolism. So there's been some research to show that some of these short chain fatty acids can actually play a role in things like gluconeogenesis. So especially in our space and the athlete space, this can be huge. If that can give someone an edge and have more efficient energy systems and metabolism going on, that's really great. And I guess the last thing I would mention just overall is that these microbiota highly influence immunity. So there's again extensive research on how these different bacterial profiles can either downregulate or upregulate our T and B cells, our immune function. And you'll find that a lot of people that have a lot of gut imbalances going on are, the sickest people. They've got metabolic issues, they've got hormonal issues, they've got just tons of other stuff going on and getting sick all the time. And so immune function, I would say, is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's a lot of great information. I mean, a lot of information to us, especially listeners that are thinking for the first time, wow, I didn't realize all the things that happening in my stomach can really be a major driver for health. And I know it's still, I don't want to say in the infancy, there's a lot of research that have been done, but I know there's a lot more research being done on that for practitioners to learn more. Now, we've talked about, things that have a positive impact. What about the opposite? So are there things people can be eating that could negatively impact their gut biology and they might not even realize?
Absolutely. So yeah, as I mentioned, those indigestible carbs or fiber are really going to be the cornerstone of building a good microbiome. So just the different types of fiber too, right? So not only soluble fiber, but insoluble fiber as well. Cellulose, inulin, resistant starch, all those different types of fibers are going to hugely positively impact the gut microbiome. But on the opposite side, if we are not consuming a diet rich in fiber and plant variety, we're going to not see as beneficial of a gut biology. And we also see a lot of associated health effects with that. So we can kind of, what we can see in the research is sort of our standard American diet or kind of our Western diet, which is, high fat, low fiber, high sugar, high refined carbohydrates. And a lot of these diets lack diversity of plant foods in the diet, are really going to result in negative gut biology. So, we can even see some of, especially from like high fat diets, it can cause what we call permeability to the gut lining, which can really impact the immune system. It can increase different inflammatory markers, things like LPS that affect the immune system and even been linked to like different autoimmune diseases and things like that. So, in general, I would just say, extremely, standard American diets, highly refined processed foods that don't contain a lot of those sources of fiber. And then there's always going to be a population of people, whether you actually have celiac disease and you can't consume gluten for more of that intensive sensitivity, but even some non-celiac gluten sensitivities that can definitely degrade the gut lining and cause negative microbiome balance as well.
So something you gave me an idea to ask. It wasn't on our questions, and I don't think it's going to throw you off, but it made me think about when you said, plants and, animal protein. There's a lot of people consuming carnivore-based diets, strictly just all animal foods, steak and eggs and nothing else. No plants, no fruits, no vegetables. I mean, I'm guessing just from general discussion, without even knowing anything about the research, this could be possibly, harming their gut at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, there's some freaking natures out there, and I don't think we can always explain every single anecdotal experience that people have.
Right.
There's going to be those people out there eating liver for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and because of the nutrient profiles, could be absolutely thriving. But I just don't think the profound amount of research that we have on not just like the nutrient quality, like the nutrient content of plant foods is very important, but just like many carnivores would argue, you can probably achieve most of your micronutrient levels by consuming animal-based products, but you're not going to get those the beneficial aspects of that short chain fatty acid production. So it just really depends on like, what are you measuring and what are you measuring and using as a baseline for your measure of health. And so I think, again, it's like, if you were to really dive deep and look into these individuals' gut microbiomes and then maybe other symptoms that are happening or other maybe conditions that develop, I think you'd likely be able to find a correlation.
Now let's kind of dive away from food. Other lifestyle factors. Are there anything that can also disrupt the gut biology that might not be related to food, smoking, alcohol, anything else that,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely alcohol is never going to have a positive impact on the gut. Also, exercise is really big, both positively and negatively. So, I was even reading some research recently that a lot of research that's being done on athletes and the gut microbiome is that they're finding that athletes have much more beneficial profiles of bacteria, like a lot more of those bacteria that we associate with more positive health outcomes. And so it's been thought that exercise is having a very positive impact on the gut biology. But there's also some things, maybe people that are excessively exercising or hitting tons of high intensity, that can actually kind of deplete the gut or deplete the gut endothelial lining a little bit and cause some issues. So again, exercise is awesome, just not wanting to take it too far the other end and make it have a negative outcome there. Another area that we could probably dive into a whole discussion on if we had more time would be the whole non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, right? So our ibuprofens, our aspirins, our Advils, there's pretty conclusive data now that's showing that these are having direct gut issues to the gut lining, permeability to the gut lining, and could be impacting immunity for athletes. And so it's been kind of recommended, while there's definitely a time and place for these medications, that, maybe we should rethink about the reliance that we have on these. So that's kind of, medications. Exercise is big. Stress is absolutely huge. Stress can actually quite literally produce cortisol in the gut, which is our stress hormone. It can work to deplete the gut lining, which can impact immunity. And then even just overall, I would say our exposure to different environmental toxins, which I've kind of alluded to a few times. So there's more research now coming out about endocrine disruptors. What are we, for women, like what do we have in our makeup products? What are we putting on our bodies? All these lotions and fragrances and stuff, they've actually been shown now to have an impact on our hormones, which can directly communicate with the gut. The brain and the gut completely connect. And so that type of stuff. And I would say just other environmental exposures. We could get into another conversation, but mold exposure is big. So mycotoxins are big, but yeah, those would be kind of the other lifestyle factors that I would say play a big role unrelated to the food.
I know something consumed by a lot of people, even myself, on a regular basis: artificial sweeteners, things like Splenda, Sweeten,
Oh yeah.
blah, blah, blah. So I've read where these can disrupt the gut microbiome. Is this true? And if so, how does that happen?
It's a great question. I think the conundrum is the jury's still out here. There's, a lot of controversy, I would say, people coming out feeling very strongly both ways. And I think that really what we can say right now is most of the research has been done in animals. And a lot of these animal studies have pretty conclusively showed disruption to the gut microbiota. They've showed glucose intolerance. And so obviously, though, we can't extrapolate this to humans. And so I think that's where a lot of the argument has been is, can we even, again, extrapolate this to humans because we're not mice, but also are we even consuming the quantities of these artificial sweeteners that would be an issue?
Right.
But, I will say, though, there have been some human studies that have been done. There was a recent review article that was put out in 2020, just kind of reviewing tons of different food additives, artificial sweeteners. And there was some human studies that suggested different microbial profiles between those consuming different artificial sweeteners and those that don't. So again, most of the conclusive research has been done in animals. So I don't think at this point we can say this is absolutely killing us, it's causing cancer. But I think there's a lot of power in anecdotal data of athletes and people that you're working with. And I will say, even just in my practice, individuals that are consuming a lot of these artificial sweeteners, whether it be in their bars, their protein powders, XYZ, they do typically report having more GI symptoms, and especially in those with digestive disorders. So I do kind of advise my athletes to just be cautious of them, be aware of them. If you have some sucralose in your protein powder, or if you have, some artificial sweeteners, you're going to be all right? Like we're not going to die over it, but it's just something, do we want to be consuming these every single day? And my thought is, with with the research that could eventually come out, it can't be great for human health. So just to be aware of it.
Excellent. Okay, so I don't have to give up a couple of packets in my coffee, or maybe every once in a while I want to have a diet drink. It's going to be okay.
At this point, I think the jury's still out.
Now, you mentioned earlier just about when babies are born, 3 to 4 weeks, their gut microbiome, depending on things, can develop. But what about genetics? Do you know if there's anything related to a genetic role in gut health? Like if mom and dad both have a history of GI problems, could that influence their child, or is that maybe due to environmental factors that are messing up their parents' gut health?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can never count out genes playing a role, because even if you look at cases like autoimmune issues, like autoimmune digestive issues, whether it be celiac or IBD or different things, typically you can see patterns with that within families. So, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a genetic expert, but what we're learning about the gut microbiome, just in human health in general, is that it's playing a large role. So if you, like, a lot of times you'll see clients come in with issues that are similar to what mom and dad experienced. And I know there's some, preliminary research out there to say that genes are likely playing a role, but I would say our environment and our lifestyle is really going to be the biggest influencer of long-term outcomes. But I mean, even just to kind of go back to the original question, what I kind of alluded to earlier is, like, mom's microbiome goes right into the baby at birth from the vaginal canal. So, at this point, probiotics are being recommended for women during pregnancy, because we know that the gut microbiome is essentially passed straight on to the fetus as well as in the breast milk. And so I think that is obviously playing a huge role. But again, we just need to look at later on in life how big of a role the environment and lifestyle factors are playing.
Awesome. All right, let's dive into kind of the signs and symptoms, right? So how would someone know if, like, maybe their microbiome could be sick? Are there certain things that they could look for, signs and symptoms, et cetera?
Sure. So signs and symptoms can kind of be all over the place. I would say some of the major ones that people experience often are going to be things like terrible bloating, distension, gas, acid reflux, or having irregularities in their stool, so diarrhea or constipation on a pretty regular basis, abdominal pain, cramping, nausea, things like that. So those are kind of, some of the obvious signs. So fatty stools or very, very loose stools. But there are other signs that the gut microbiome could be imbalanced that maybe don't directly, they're not directly symptomized by the stomach, right? So allergies are a big one. Skin issues, so acne, eczema, psoriasis, hives popping up. We can even think about other signs of inflammation, so like headaches and migraines, or joint pain, wrist tightness, joint pain in the hands, ankles, knees, things like that. Fatigue is a huge one. Even anxiety and depression now have been linked to gut imbalances, because we know the gut and the brain connect. So both digestive symptoms as well as other non-digestive symptoms.
Now, could someone have a healthy gut but still have some symptoms, even like if they eat a certain type of food that might just cause gas or things like that?
Right. I think that, if someone is having a little gas here and there, some puffs, but, they're not getting extremely painful gas, or, they might feel distension after eating, but it's not an uncomfortable bloat, then that individual could potentially still be healthy. But I think that in general, if we're getting into very uncomfortable bloating and gas, you're having reflux multiple times, a week, or even just after eating something simple like a cup of coffee, then there's something deeper going on. I would say more often than not, someone is not just going to have symptoms and not and have a healthy gut, because the symptoms are there for a reason. So it's not to say that if you have a little bit of gas here and there that you have an extremely unhealthy gut, but we need to think through what is our tolerance of normal, because I think we've kind of pushed the boundaries on that nowadays.
Now let's reverse that a little bit. So can someone have an unhealthy gut but not have any symptoms at all and just have no idea?
I think, well, it depends on how you look at this. If you're going to say not having symptoms as in like bloating gassed. I mean, I've known individuals that have been diagnosed with celiac disease, but never had gut symptoms in their life. And so, their symptom might be just feeling fatigued or feeling, having some nutrient deficiencies, but not having like those overt gut symptoms. So I would definitely say you could have a very unhealthy gut, but not have gut symptoms. That would kind of be my take on that.
Okay. No, that's great. That's a great explanation. And I want to kind of dive into the testing piece because now listeners are probably like, all right, she's talked a lot about all these different things that are really interesting
Mm-hmm.
signs and symptoms, but is there a way for me to test for that? And are there ways that we can determine maybe the health of our stomach or the unhealth of our gut? Are there any tests that you recommend for someone?
As far as testing, a lot of individuals will go to the gastroenterologist or come from a GI doc and have had testing done, or can sometimes get testing done, whether it be an actual stool test or an endoscopy to look at what's going on. And definitely these tests are going to capture any major issues, right? So if there's like really high elevated levels of an H. pylori or other candida or bacterial infections, or especially like an endoscopy can help identify celiac disease or some more serious IBD or other just in more intensive gut issue, digestive issues. However, in the functional space, we do tend to utilize more sensitive stool testing, just to get again, just to pick up a little bit more sensitive levels. So really providing true quantitative and qualitative values on like what are the levels of these organisms that may not come out in like a conventional stool panel through the doctor because the level might not be high enough, or they're kind of just looking for more of a positive or negative type of result. And so definitely I would say the stool testing has been very helpful in just helping individuals get a little bit deeper and find results for things that they're not getting answers for from the GI doc or from some of these less sensitive tests. We have a lot of people that come in with tons of GI symptoms that they haven't had any real answers or had success through the doctor. And then we're able to look into these tests and find a little bit more sensitive, use more sensitive technology to find levels of the different invaders that could be going on and know how to better balance their gut through these results.
Excellent. Okay. Let's kind of dive into supplementation, right? Probiotics is a $61 billion industry. What's your stance on probiotics? There's so many options, and I'm just like, oh, I know nothing about it. I feel like I'm pretty well versed in supplements, but that's one area I just don't know much about.
Sure. Oh, I mean, and it's impossible truly to know everything there is to know at this point about probiotics. And if I'm being honest, first of all, there's just so many factors that you have to look into before even recommending a probiotic to a person. I think honestly nowadays it's kind of just thrown out to everyone as candy, and that's a lot of that has been a result of the fact that we're learning so much about the positive role that beneficial bacteria do play, and so many people are experiencing very positive results from probiotics. But I would say that again, like there's so many different things you have to look into, and the research is pretty vast as far as like what type of strains to use for this person, or what type of, how many colony forming units should you use for this type of issue. And honestly, we've even, on our website FWDfuel, we have an awesome blog that we write research based articles in. And one of us honestly just dove into a lot of the research and actually started to research, what type of probiotics are beneficial, or what's the research been done in specific probiotics for maybe a sprinter versus a weightlifter. And of course, there's so much to be done still and so much room for more research in this area, but just wanted to make that comment of like, there's no perfect probiotic. There's no perfect strain that you're looking for. There's a lot that are working. There's a lot that aren't working. And you really just have to be able to, as a clinician, and as a patient, I would say, like, know that you're working with someone that's going to kind of direct you in the right way versus just, some random person on the internet telling you to take a probiotic, because it can actually potentially do more harm than good. For example, for someone that's dealing with different bacterial overgrowth, something like SIBO, where a probiotic could really throw them over the edge and make symptoms worse. And so, yeah, sorry, I think I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think the main point I'm trying to make is, there's a lot of different types out there. There's different strains. Lactobacillus has been one of the more beneficial strains to look for, but there's also tons of research that's being done into the gut microbiome right now that we haven't even been able to extrapolate like those specific strains and get them into supplemental form yet.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point, because it's as you can see, it's a massive industry, and people are just taking things that they buy off the shelf, thinking, "Oh, I'm taking a probiotic just to say that," and they may not be doing anything. Like a lot of other supplements, they're buying things and just take them because
Correct.
they want to say they're taking them, but more than likely they're not doing anything to improve their health. Now, foods like kimchi, kombucha. I mean, I know kombucha is massive. Are these beneficial at doing anything to help or improve our gut health?
Sure. So there's definitely a time and a place, I would say, for these fermented foods. It can really be kind of the icing on the cake and the extra little push that someone could use in improving their gut health. But, I would not say that I would die on this hill that everyone needs to be eating fermented foods when maybe they're not even prioritizing eating a plant-rich diet and prioritizing various sources of fiber and colors throughout their day, because that's really where a lot of the magic happens, I would say. Now, again, the kimchi and the kefir and things with the live strains and serving as more of those live sources can be helpful. But I would say really prioritize getting a wide variety of plant-rich foods in the diet that are high in both prebiotics and probiotics, and that the rest, as far as just really putting more of your attention into that. And then if you want to utilize these foods on a weekly basis to kind of top off what you're already doing, then I would say it's likely not going to hurt you unless you are someone that is having very intensive digestive symptoms. Then these types of foods could be worse. And that goes into a deeper conversation of other imbalances that could be going on. But if you consume kombucha, you consume kimchi, and you feel good with it, you don't feel bloated or you don't feel other symptoms, they're fine to consume. But again, I wouldn't make that like the cornerstone of your approach to improving your gut health. And especially things like kombucha, they can have a lot of added sugars in them. And so I'll typically recommend for individuals, buy a bottle or two and kind of split it throughout the week if you really enjoy it and really want to consume it. But, don't go consuming a bottle of kombucha every single day and think that it's going to kind of be that quick fix, like a lot of people might.
Right, right. Well, we talked a little bit about probiotics. Is there anything that you're aware of on the supplementation side, right? Not saying we want to try to put a Band-Aid on something with supplements, but is there something somebody could take that could be helpful for their stomach health overall? Maybe reduce bloat, reduce inflammation, anything that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I would say, and just as you mentioned, I think making a good point, like if you're having digestive symptoms, then you don't want to just go masking it with other supplements that could just be viewed as another Band-Aid, because you got to address whatever the underlying kind of problem or imbalance is. But digestive enzymes can definitely have a place. So, there's a bunch of different types of digestive enzymes out there, but that could be helpful. Digestive bitters can be very helpful. So this is often found, in your local health food store, but different blends of bitter herbs that can actually been shown to help naturally produce stomach acid and kind of break down food for people that are having acid reflux frequently or having a lot of bloating and indigestion after eating. So I would say those are kind of two of the helpful ones in terms of really supporting more the digestive aspect of things. Some of the other areas, if someone is dealing with more deeper rooted intestinal permeability, there's some research to show like L-glutamine could be helpful, marshmallow root, some of these other kind of what we call mucilaginous herbs. But again, I would kind of recommend you're working with a trained professional in the space to kind of guide you on that. probiotics are going to be hit or miss. I don't think it's extremely harmful for an individual to try a probiotic. It could be very beneficial, but you just have to understand that it if you do not feel better with it, that's an indication you shouldn't be taking it. And so sometimes in the situations of probiotics, it's going to be kind of trial and error, as well as some of these other approaches. And if you're not really finding success with it, then again, I really do recommend like working with someone specialized that can kind of better direct you.
Okay. No, excellent. And as we kind of close this out, Abby, anything else that we didn't discuss today that you feel would be beneficial for our listeners to know?
I think I just kind of have like one overarching point that I want to make, and that's that I think in this world we can really get siloed into all these different aspects of health, and there's so much information. There's such a mass quantity of information that is available nowadays, some of which is great, a lot of which that isn't. And so I would say, don't believe everything you hear, especially as it results to, gut health. And, there's tons of different herbal remedies out there for parasite cleansing and, just really erratic things that I think people are trying to kind of just self-treat right off the shelf for right for the retailers to purchase. And so I think it's just important to know that don't believe everything you kind of see, and work with someone to kind of give you the professional guidance that's going to help you and not hurt you. And that also just know that, especially as it relates to the gut microbiome and gut health, everything is often related. And so if you're dealing with a lot of these symptoms that I talked about today, whether it be gut issues or maybe other symptoms of fatigue or skin issues or, headaches and migraines or joint pain, these things don't exist in a silo, and everything is kind of related, and we have to start treating everything in a system of a web where everything is interacting with each other. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. But just kind of wanted to throw that out there because I know this topic is loaded and we can go down rabbit holes of feeling like there's so many different problems going on and you need to spot treat with all these different, protocols and remedies. But really you need to, just start with the fundamentals and then work with someone that can really guide you on how to just treat everything in the best way with less intervention, I would say.
No, that's awesome. This was excellent. Phenomenal information. And what's cool about this is we'll probably want to have this conversation again in a year because there'll probably be a whole bunch of new research
that
comes
absolutely.
out. And you're like, Tavis, I have all this new information to share. So let's do this again. Now, this is great information.
Exactly.
But you're not ready to go just yet because we have what's called our curveball round, and these are questions that you were not able to see before we got on this. Now, I actually wrote down 4. I usually do 3 with every single guest. I've never asked anyone 4, so I may throw 4 at you. The first one is one that I ask every single person because I am a music lover more than anything else. If I could go back in time, I would actually work in the music industry before being a dietitian.
That's awesome.
So
I love it.
If you could be the lead singer of any band today, who would that be?
Oh man. I have to say I love country. So I'd probably, although it's a lot of solo artists in the country world nowadays. Can I be like the backup singer for Luke Combs?
You could be. You could say, look, I'd love to be the lead singer or sing Luke Combs' music. That's completely fine. No, that's great. I love it. All right. If you only had 3 foods that you can eat for the rest of your life, what would those 3 foods be? And it could be a meal. It doesn't have to be an individual food.
Okay. I love it. Easy for me. Number 1 is peanut butter. Number 2 is like a good burger. Cannot go wrong. Good burger. Number 3 would probably be sweet potatoes. Probably boring, but literally could eat them for every meal.
Anyway, peanut butter, burger, sweet potatoes. Well, that's an interesting thing. But
avocado. Can I put avocado in there too?
Yeah. Okay. We'll put the avocado and peanut butter. No. All right. Let's do this real quick. Let's go to this one, and then I do want to ask you a 4th one if it's okay.
Sure.
Something about you that only very few people know.
Oh man, this is hard. Let's see. Very few people know.
Like, and I'll give you an example. For me, I was a lead singer in a 90s alternative cover band that only my friends and people around me, no one in my profession knows that. So, something like that along those lines.
Okay. Well, I'm not as exciting as you in that regard, but I'm really good at walking on my hands. So only people that see me in the gym once in a while see me do that.
Okay. Last question. I'll save this one for last. I think it's probably the most difficult. If you had one superpower, that you could reverse any disease in the world, what would that be?
Wait, one superpower
so if you had the superpower to reverse any disease in the world right now, what would that be?
So what's the soup? I'm confused. Sorry. I'm saying what the superpower is?
If you had the ability or power to reverse any disease in the world.
Any disease in the world. If I had the power, okay, it all makes sense now.
Yep.
I mean, I have to say cancer, right? Yeah. I mean, if I could reverse cancer, I think I could die a happy person.
Yeah, no, I love that because heart disease, we know we can kind of treat that and not reverse it, but really prolong it. Cancer, sometimes you can treat it, but it doesn't always work. And I think that's the one thing that, if we can figure out a way to cure permanently.
That's exactly what went through my head, because we've got a lot of power, especially after our conversation today and what we're knowing. We have a lot of power in a lot of these common health conditions. So I agree with you 100% there.
Abby, thank you so much for today. This was fantastic, incredible information. We look forward to having you back in the future.
Yes, I already look forward to it too. And thank you again so much for the opportunity.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.